And this is a sermon or reflection on the readings for the third Sunday of Epiphany season. In particular, Matthew chapter 4, verses 12 through 23. Chapter 4, verses 12 through 23. But really, it's a reflection on a lot of other things as well. I want to tell you the tale of two prophetic moments. One came from a man in poor health in his mid-70s, the other from a young teenager. First, Paul. The first thing to note about Paul was that in his poor health, at the beginning of his old years, as Joan Chichester would call them, he was still agitating for the kingdom of God. He called me out of the blue one day from a city and a state I had formerly lived in. He said he wanted to put me on the ballot for bishop in his diocese. He wasn't really asking, he was telling me I needed to be on the ballot. In the Episcopal Church, bishops are elected. Anyway, the search committee had already nominated 5 candidates going through their normal discernment process and selection and all that. But Paul and a group of other clergy and I guess laity that he was representing said none of those 5 had the slightest whiff of prophetic ministry to their names, or to their resumes, really. So I needed to be on the ballot, he said, with his gravelly, resonant voice. I was stunned, actually, when he said it. Actually, I remember feeling small. You see, Paul was somebody whose ministry and truly prophetic witness throughout the years was someone that I deeply, deeply respected, revered even. So for him to suggest that I could meet his notion of prophetic ministry made me feel like an imposter. And I will confess to you that most of the time I don't feel like I've done anything other than preach a whole bunch of sermons. But the point of that story is Paul, late in his life, after having retired from teaching seminary and active ministry in poor health, wasn't about to stop agitating and working for what he understood to be the kingdom of God. So he placed me at a crossroads where I had to make a decision. And that's what a prophet does. Places us at a crossroads where we need to make a decision and to be honest about why we're making it. I did accept that nomination, and I was placed on the ballot, something that required, I guess, a considerable number of signatures on a petition, since I was not one of the original nominees put forth by the search committee, and which I hadn't, put myself there for. Then there was an historic intervention. The first openly gay man became a bishop in New Hampshire. It was a big deal, and it rattled the cage of much of the more conservative Anglican communion around the world, to which the Episcopal Church is a part. There was anxiety and anger that made the leadership in the Episcopal Church in this country very nervous. They wrung their hands, and they didn't make a decision for a long time, as they didn't want to make a decision for a long time if they could get away with it. What they did was to call a moratorium on electing any bishop for a year. Now, the diocese where I had been nominated called all 6 candidates and offered to let us back out of the ballot if we didn't want to be in limbo that whole year. Now the second prophetic voice. As you know, I have 4 children. They are 7 years apart, from the youngest to the oldest. There had been a lot of consternation in my house brewing among my kids over my acceptance of that nomination. They They had only been in their present schools and their present neighborhood for 5 years when this came up. They had some feelings about it. So, thinking that I could calm those feelings, we had a family meeting about it. But the level of emotion that the older two especially were feeling is what I would call hot, boiling even. So finally, while I assured them that I understood their worries and their unhappiness, I said I was taken aback by the intensity of their anger. What is it? What's making you so angry? Then my oldest son, a very young teenager at the time, said that I had been there to attend all of his sporting events and school concerts and activities that parents are invited to, but that if I did this, if I was elected a bishop, especially a bishop in that diocese, I would never be able to do that for their youngest brother. I wouldn't be around, they said. I wouldn't be available, they said. I wouldn't be the dad that they had known, they said. I was, of course, speechless. In my mind, I was already running through scenarios by which I could assure that I was available as an active parent, even while being bishop. But even as I conjured those thoughts and scenarios, I knew they were lies. He was right. My young teenage son, and my oldest daughter too, placed me at a crossroads where I had to make a decision. Again, that is a prophetic moment. Now, what exactly is a prophet? First of all, the word prophet with a P-H-E-T, not an F-I-T. Everyone in our world knows what profit is, F-I-T. It's making money. Making money is the end goal of the economic empire that we live in. Thy kingdom come in our empire is making money, and the more the better. But what is a prophet? P-H-E-T. I'll quote one of Paul's sermons because in his usual way, he spelled it out quite clearly. He wrote, "Why in the world would there be any confusion," he wrote, "about what it means to be followers of Christ? Why is there any confusion about what the priorities for humanity to live within the kingdom of God, the domain, the realm of God? There is a higher allegiance than nation, than tribe, than family, allegiance to the realm of God. The kingdom of God is not something that human beings build," he wrote. "It is already here as a gift. Our task is to build a way to live together as humanity that conforms more nearly to the rule of God, with attention to the real issues of peace, justice, inclusiveness, eliminating poverty, providing for health care, caring for the planet, creating and sustaining that kind of social order. Other concerns become trivial or secondary." Said that way, if true, we are placed at a crossroads. We are placed at a moment of decision about who and what we will be, the kingdom we will serve, what we seek to build. That was Paul's description of what prophetic ministry is, and he would say, if he were alive and here preaching, that any of us who are baptized, anybody who's baptized, are baptized to be prophets in this world of ours. Whatever else we are, healers, teachers, servants, leaders, reformers, pastors, parents, plumbers, bakers, we are to be prophets, the arm and the legs and the voice of the love of God. To quote Martin Luther King Jr. once again, the question is not, What are we prepared to die for? The question is, what are we prepared to live for? So let's notice a little something about this story from Matthew that Matthew tells about Jesus. It starts out like this. I'll quote it, the first two sentences. Now, when Jesus heard that John the Baptist had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth, and he made his home in Capernaum by the sea. Now, I interpret that to mean that he was hiding out. Think about it. Jesus was a big fan of John the Baptist. John was the go-to guy. John was the main prophet of his day, someone Jesus must have looked up to. He went to be baptized by John, after all. But then suddenly, John was beheaded. King Herod cut John the Baptist's head off and had it carried on a silver platter and presented as a present to his stepdaughter. How ghastly is that? When he heard it, Jesus must have felt naked. All of a sudden, Jesus was the go-to guy. Jesus was the prophet of his day now, and the next in line to lose his head. So what does he do? He takes off and relocates. Nazareth was too small. He could be too easily found there. He relocates instead to a lakeside city that was actually quite cosmopolitan in his day. And he slips into the city and becomes part of the urban fabric and much less easy to notice or to trace. From there, he goes about looking for students. We call them groupies, but they called them disciples. By some accounts, he spent the next 3 years building up a following by going out into the countryside and preaching and then returning to the city with his students. 3 years of vibrant life before he too was put to death by the brutal power of empire. This is not a make-believe story. It happened. And it has happened thousands of times. But Jesus was not looking for trouble. I suspect that, like you and me, Jesus did not want to end up a glop of goo between the toes of the Roman Empire. When John was killed, Jesus must have been scared. You and I are scared. And I think that's where we need to begin our deeper exploration of baptism. We're scared. We're scared. There's nobody online reading or listening to this that wants to be an outcast. Nobody wants to risk their reputation. Nobody is unafraid of losing their livelihood. Nobody lives without anxiety or a sense of vulnerability or to the powers that are greater and certainly more brutal than ourselves. Nobody would knowingly and willingly follow Jesus or John or anybody else for that matter to humiliation, let alone to torture and death, and not if we could possibly be avoided. We're afraid of some things. We're afraid of some people. We know that rumor, innuendo, and accusation are powerful agents of hatred and anger in our world. It doesn't take much to ruin somebody now, does it? So we're afraid. We're afraid to care too much. So much is beyond our control. And there seems to be so little we can do about injustice that we're afraid even to care too much. We're afraid to go out on a limb for a cause or a person or an issue because once we are labeled as extreme, no one will ever give us any kind of credibility again. We're even afraid to tell someone that their joke offended us, that there's no humor in degrading anyone by race or gender or sexuality. We're even afraid to tell people who we know well that we not only believe in God, but that we actually worship God and seek to become a part of God's kingdom that's here and now. We don't go around telling people that. So here's an invitation today. The Epiphany baptismal moment, if you will. What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? Who are we afraid of? What is our fear keeping us from doing? When was the last time we acted in spite of our fear? When we know what is behind the curtain of our fear, then we can begin to get clear about what we're willing to live for. When we get clear about our fear, we become clear about what we're willing to live for. And when we are clear about what we're willing to live for, we begin to more fully live the life that the giver of all life has given us. Remember, by virtue of our baptism, we have been called to be prophetic. We don't have to be a prophet and live out on the edge, but we're called by baptism to be prophetic, to bring ourselves and one another to the crossroad of decision where we must choose between the economy of God and our economy. It's never a once and for all thing either. It's not a global decision, rather small, particular moments of decision, usually between incremental actions and commitments that contribute to that kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, or conversely, to contribute to the economy of empire. Those small incremental choices are the decision we are called to make, are called to share, are called to incarnate, to embody. They scare us, yeah. And so we need one another, and we need a sacred community to give us strength, to nurture our courage. By the way, the day after my kids placed me at that crossroads, I withdrew my nomination. Thank you for being here. I wish you peace.